In the midst of the debacle and death in the American exit from Afghanistan, an unexpected voice spoke out from high within the military ranks.
People are upset because their senior leaders let them down.
And then the upright Marine went rogue.
And we will bring the whole system down.
Today, we talk with former Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller about the stand he took and the consequences of his calls for accountability.
Gas prices have seen a dramatic increase in the past year, even though the United States has plenty of oil.
We've started to import more oil than we actually produce here in the United States.
This week, we take a look at an identity crisis in the oil fields and why it's costing you more at the pump.
You think he runs in 2024?
I'd bet my house on it.
And Congressman Jim Jordan on the potential of another Trump run and being at the center of Capitol Hill firestorms amid efforts to impeach the 45th president.
Secret depositions and hearings on trying to impeach the president of the United States, and the country couldn't see it.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Last August, during the chaotic exit from Afghanistan, a suicide bomber attacked an entry point to the Kabul airport where thousands were trying to flee the Islamic extremist Taliban. That blast killed 13 American service personnel, including 11 Marines. This week, President Biden stood by his decisions on the U.S. exit from Afghanistan.
There is no way to get out of Afghanistan after 20 years easily. Not possible, no matter when you did it. And I make no apologies for what I did.
At the time, one Marine officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, took the unusual step of going public on social media to condemn U.S. leadership and demand accountability. The videos he made landed Scheller in the brig, then onto a court-martial. Now out of the Marines, he tells me his mission is far from over.
On August 26, I was sitting in my office in Jacksonville, North Carolina as a battalion commander, and the attacks happened, and I just got to a point where I knew no one was going to be held accountable. The plan was horrible. It wasn't done out of negligence, but it was done out of, well, here's the restraints that the president put on the plan, and nobody had the courage to push back. No one had the leadership to convince him of why we needed more troops. So I made a video essentially addressing that.
Did any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, the strategic air base, before we evacuate everyone? Did anyone do that? And when you didn't think to do that, did anyone raise their hand and say, we completely messed this up?
You know, one of the fears when I made the video was, you know, because I'm calculating all these things, I could have made the video and posted it and nobody would have liked it or shared it, and then my boss still would have seen it, and then I still would have gotten fired, and I would have ultimately failed, right? So I was thinking through that, like, what if nobody cares about this video and now I throw my whole career away for nothing? So the video took off much bigger than I could have ever imagined.
Scheller posted a video on social media criticizing military leaders for mistakes made during the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
When I came into work the next day, my boss said that, like, hey, there's going to be an investigation. Go home, and I'll call you on Monday, and we'll reevaluate and turn over the battalion to the XO. But then 2 hours later, my boss called me back into work, and he just relieved me. And he didn't explain why he did a 180, and I didn't ask. I assumed the generals all the way up to the commandant's office was just getting such pressure that they said he's got to be relieved immediately. No investigation, just get rid of him.
The video, the first of 4 he would post over several weeks, got the ball rolling toward what would ultimately be his departure from the Marines after 17 years. A second video dramatically escalated the tension.
And the second video was very emotional. I didn't take multiple takes. It was like Jay-Z one cut, release, post. And if I could go back, that's the one video that I maybe would have said different things.
What did you say in that
video? I said at the end of it, well, ultimately, if you read, the first part of it was all very accurate. I talked about, hey, I demanded accountability.
You know, all I asked for was accountability of my senior leaders when there are clear, obvious mistakes that were made. I'm not saying we can take back what has been done. All I asked for was accountability, for people to comment on what I said and to say, yes, mistakes were made.
And then at the end of it, I started talking about how the system was corrupt.
And we will bring the whole system down.
And that statement right there just caused everyone to lose context of everything else. And then it started snowballing into me getting painted in the media as a violent extremist because I said, I'm going to bring your effing system down. So if I could go back, I would change that verbiage, but the content of everything else in there stands. I mean, you got to understand the weight of the situation. I was making a second video knowing that my marriage would probably fall apart because I didn't tell her I was making the second video. I knew I was giving up my retirement. I knew I was giving up my life. Much easier for people to pick apart on the aftermath without fully appreciating the weight of that situation.
With the world's attention now on his message, Colonel Scheller posted a third video in violation of a gag order just before he knew general officers would be testifying to Congress.
And that was probably my most insightful post where I just basically attacked a lot of people, but I said true things.
For example, Secretary of State Blinken just testified in Congress and got beat up, justifiably, but why General McKenzie, who was the CENTCOM commander from Trump to Biden, didn't have to answer those same tough questions. Afghanistan has been a DoD run and led mission for the last 20 years. Why the Department of State is taking the face shots to the fall is beyond me.
Then I showed up at work that Monday, and sure enough, they put me in jail. And I understand the thought process.
That brought even more attention, news coverage, and pressure.
To this day, Scheller remains the only person in the United States punished in any way for the debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
So then when I was in jail, they offered me a legal deal that stated if you plead guilty to 5 charges at special court-martial, we'll let you out of jail. You can get a honorable or a general under honorable, and then you have to resign and give up your retirement. So I thought if I said not guilty to any of them and tried to beat it to keep my retirement, it might take away from me showing what accountability looks like and negate the whole purpose of the endeavor. So I decided to plead guilty, and I got out of jail by signing the deal. From the beginning, I knew I had broken some of the rules. But it's not, I broke the rules to highlight an issue that I thought was bigger than that. You know, you're never going to bring back the 13 service members that got killed, but you can prevent placing members in bad situations in the future by addressing these things through open and transparent conversation.
Are you satisfied with the result you got in the end?
It's not the end. I, as an officer, was able to affect limited change. I maybe sparked a conversation, but ultimately none of them have been held accountable yet. So going back to that one statement where I said, I wish I would have changed bringing your whole effing system down, ultimately what I meant was there are fundamental problems with the system that need to be changed, and I'm still fully committed to making that happen.
Scheller says it's not about political party, it's about strong and committed leadership. He's now helping to get candidates elected to Congress this year and says he may run himself in 2024. Ahead on Full Measure, why isn't the U.S. producing more oil to ease gas prices? One of the vexing challenges facing the Biden administration in an important election year for Congress is the high cost of fuel, and experts say there appears to be no major relief in sight. Scott Thuman reports from Texas on why we aren't producing more oil here to bring down prices and meet demand.
In America's energy heartland, a battle between old and new powers comes at a critical time. 40% of the nation's crude oil and a quarter of its natural gas comes from here. But even Texas can't escape the pain at the pump we've all felt, as prices for everything have risen for nearly a year. In January of 2020, before the pandemic hit, the average price of gas was $2.55. Nearly 800 rigs were drilling, and America produced so much that we exported more petroleum than we imported. Today, gas averages $3.31 a gallon. There are around 588 rigs at work, and we import more petroleum products than we sell overseas.
gasoline prices follow the oil price because gasoline is a byproduct of oil. So we've had a tight supply globally and rapidly increasing demand.
David Blackman, an oil industry analyst, says there's a reason you're still forking over more to heat your home and drive your car.
We had the big depression in the industry in 2020 because of COVID. The industry has recovered from that somewhat, but it's a combination of the companies ramping things back up. That always takes time when you go through a bust and you're coming out of it.
To help consumers, President Biden late last year authorized a rare release of 50 million barrels from the nation's strategic reserve. But that only represents about 2.5 days of the nation's consumption, and since the announcement, prices have only come down slightly. The president, in his first press conference of the year, unable to say when the pain at the pump will end.
You pull up to a pump and all of a sudden, instead of paying $2.40 a gallon, they're paying $5 a gallon. That's going to be really difficult.
So we've come back to Texas, where we've covered the oil and gas industry before, to see why supply still isn't meeting demand. Jason Modulin is president of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, where they boast they've got plenty of what the nation needs.
Prices are high, supply and demand aren't being met properly, so the government says, hey, Texas, hey, the rest of the country, produce more oil. Why isn't it that easy?
It's not that easy because we need some certainty taking place.
Certainty, he says, needed because producers want to know their investment in new wells will pay off for years to come. And some industry leaders say that's in doubt as the White House policies dramatically change the game, halting new permits on federal land, stopping pipelines, and making major clean energy commitments. It was a cornerstone of President Biden's campaign.
High energy prices only reinforce the urgent need to diversify sources, double down on clean energy development, and adapt promising new clean energy technologies so we can not only we don't remain overly reliant on one source of power.
When you say that oil and gas is going away in 10 years, that you're going to foreclose natural gas, electric-fired power plants from having access to that natural gas, that really signals to the market that you shouldn't invest here because that market is going away. They've also threatened investigations of companies.
The president wants an investigation by the FTC into whether or not oil companies are rigging prices.
That's right. Price fixing at the gas pump, which is not taking place. That's a frequent political charge, but rarely yields any dividends on that charge.
Do you think right now you're seeing a hesitation to produce more locally, even though we certainly can?
We certainly can. We need that certainty both from federal partners. We also need them to stop calling on OPEC to produce more.
OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, is the international cartel led by the major oil-producing Arab states of the Persian Gulf that often coordinate with Russia to control how much oil they all produce and therefore what the price of oil and gas will be. Last year, President Biden outraged some analysts by criticizing the U.S. oil industry as polluting or dirty, then calling on OPEC, America's competitors, to supply the world with more oil to slow rising prices.
What did you think when you heard the president say he wanted OPEC and other countries to start producing more because we were suffering here?
Yeah, we'd ask him to call us first. We frequently said, choose Midland over Moscow, because that would be a better place. The phone would actually be answered, and we'd say, we're happy to ramp up production here in the United States if we have a partner in the White House that wants to see more American production.
U.S. oil production averaged 11 million barrels a day in 2021. The government forecasts it'll reach 11.7 million this year, still less than the 12.2 million that were produced before the pandemic. But Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm says there's more that oil companies could do to boost production.
We have 250 fewer oil rigs that are functioning today than we did before the pandemic. And yet, the oil and gas industry has leases on 23 million acres of public lands on and offshore. Over 9,500 permits have been issued that are not being used.
President Trump was very proud to say that this country has become energy independent. That was then, this is now, and that claim doesn't hold anymore.
It doesn't hold because we've started to import more oil than we actually produce here in the United States. We've had a goal since the 1970s to be energy independent, but when we have these resources here in the United States, we should take advantage of them.
And in Texas, there certainly are an abundance of resources, old and new, even as the political winds of change are blowing across this energy-rich landscape.
So what could change the equation with our dependence on foreign oil now?
Well, at least two factors. The very real concern of a Russian invasion of Ukraine and also the increased number of attacks on Arab oil states by Iran-backed fighters and terrorists. Both of those things are pushing up the price of crude. That may prioritize and incentivize more production here in America to not only secure supply, but also as a matter of national security.
Explains a lot. Thanks so much. And coming up on Full Measure, what it's like to be at the center of Capitol Hill firestorms. American politics has become a contact sport, it seems. Few know it better than a top congressional Republican named Jim Jordan. Now, in his book, Do What You Said You Would Do, the former college wrestling coach is talking about doing business in Washington while taking more than a few bullets for Donald Trump.
Like one of the stories I tell is the day Gates and Scalise and some of my colleagues stormed, as the press would say, stormed the bunker in the basement of the Capitol, and how that all unfolded.
Stormed this closed-door deposition in a secure room and disrupted
the so-called Republican storming of a closed hearing happened in October of 2019. Congressional Democrats led by Adam Schiff were set on impeaching President Trump.
Adam Schiff was doing secret depositions and hearings on trying to impeach the President of the United States, and the country couldn't see it. And members of Congress said, this is ridiculous. Our constituents have a right to know what's going on. At least let their representative be a part of that. And they came in and he gavelled it out, got all mad, called me to his office.
Adam Schiff called you to his office. Do you have to go? And what did he say?
No, he said he just wanted to talk to me. So I grabbed Meadows, who was in there. It's interesting because there was a few guys who we probably were in more depositions than anyone else, probably even more than Schiff. Mark Meadows, myself, Scott Perry, and Lee Zeldin.
Listening to other people giving testimony.
Yeah, and so he was upset that these other members wanted to be there and hear what was going on. Gavelled a close to the deposition and the hearing and asked me to come down to his office. I grabbed Meadows and Perry. We went down to his office and had a little discussion. And he told me, he goes, "You got to tell him to leave." I go, "I got to tell him to leave. You're the chairman. I'm kind of glad they're here." And long story short, it was a little kind of interesting meeting, but they wound up staying. And until we got called to the floor to actually vote on some other legislation. But it was one of those days that I help galvanize the party, because the conventional wisdom was going into impeachment that every Democrat would vote for it and Republicans would lose some members that would vote with the Democrats. And it wound up being just the opposite.
There will be a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives, Mr. Speaker, on the impeachment of the president.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Every Republican voted against impeaching President Trump, which was the right decision, right position. And then 2 Democrats voted with us, and a third switched parties and voted with us. So, and I think that moment really helped bring our team together and show the American people how ridiculous this whole thing was.
Jordan was also a key defender of Trump in the face of a hostile and sometimes law-breaking FBI. The Inspector General eventually recommended criminal charges against ex-FBI Director James Comey and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, but the Department of Justice gave both a pass and didn't bring charges. More recently, an FBI lawyer was convicted of doctoring a document to get a wiretap and spy on a Trump associate. And thanks to an ongoing investigation by U.S. Attorney John Durham, we now know more. The FBI's top lawyer at the time reportedly conferred with a Clinton lawyer before the wiretap. The Clinton lawyer was linked to the dossier of secret information the FBI used to claim Trump was a Russian spy. The dossier was actually political opposition research paid for by Democrats.
I think they knew. I think Jim Comey knew the dossier was garbage, but they needed a reason to do what they wanted to do, which was to go after President Trump.
If the tail is wagging the dog and the government is doing this, then who does ultimately hold them accountable? Because once again, we're back to the FBI and the Department of Justice, many of the same people still there or who know the people involved. Are they going to be left to do investigations about who's accountable?
Well, ultimately, Congress has got to do the oversight, but we can't, as you know, we can't prosecute anyone. And if we're fortunate enough to be back in the majority in January of 23, which I think is a darn good chance that happens, then we will do the oversight and we will have the hearings you need to have to get the information out there. But in the end, for people to ultimately be held accountable and people to be prosecuted, it takes a Justice Department willing to do that. My guess is that's not going to happen until President Trump runs in 24, is elected president, so we're talking in sometime in 2025.
You think he runs in 2024?
I'd bet my house on it. I mean, he hasn't said anything officially, but I want him to run. I mean, you think about the title of our book, Do What You Said You Would Do. No president has done more what they said they would do than President Trump. I mean, I used to do this list during the campaign. He said he would cut taxes, he did. He said he'd reduce regulation, he did. Said he'd build the wall, he did. Said he'd get out of Iran deal, he did. Said he'd put the embassy in Jerusalem, he did. Said he'd put conservatives on the court, he did. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Coney Barrett, said he, I mean, on and on we could go. And he did all that with everyone in this town against him. Every Democrat, everyone in the mainstream press, everyone in the bureaucracy.
Some Republicans.
And I was just getting rid of that. Some Republicans. You beat me to the punch.
What is it like to have been targeted because you are in that orbit?
If you believe in this great country, you're gonna have to fight for the things that make the country special in the first place. You're going to get attacked. You just are. They're going to call you names, call you racist, and try to cancel you, but it's worth it nonetheless.
Most recently, Jordan is under attack for announcing he will not cooperate with the Democrat-led investigation into the January 6, 2021 Capitol riots. Democrats accuse him of being evasive. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, we investigate the controversial push to provide payments or reparations to Black Americans for slavery.
I can't be okay if there are still people out there who want to see me oppressed and deprived of my rights.
It's white guilt, and what they're demanding is extortion money.
Who, if anyone, should pay for slavery sins and how much? Next week on Full Measure. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.